"I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class isn't for caretakers." That's what the gate agent said, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. Valerie Knight stood frozen, hand on her mother's shoulder, while passengers glanced over their shoulders, some curious, some just annoyed. What the woman didn't know was that Valerie wasn't a nurse. She was a CEO, and the woman she called a dependent. She just happened to control more wealth than half the US Senate combined. Chicago Midway Airport had seen its fair share of high-profile travelers, but it had never seen Valerie Knight, at least not like this. She'd flown out of this terminal dozens of times. Quiet, efficient, in and out. First class, no fuss. But today was different. Today, she wasn't flying solo. She was traveling with her mother, Opal Knight, 83 years old, sharp as ever, and dressed with her usual understated grace. A dark gray wool coat, pressed slacks, leather gloves. No flashy jewelry, just dignity. They were headed to New York for an ESG investment summit, Valerie's arena. She was a headliner. But what mattered more to her was this: her mother, the woman who taught her how to walk into rooms that weren't built for her, would finally see her command one. As they approached the first-class counter, Valerie smiled at the gate agent. A woman in her 50s with tightly pinned hair and the kind of expression that had seen too many shift changes. "Good afternoon," Valerie said, handing over her phone. "Valerie Knight, seat 1A. This is my mother, Opal Knight, seat 1B. We're a little early." The agent, S. Coates, according to her name badge, barely glanced at the screen before looking up. Her eyes flicked between Valerie and Opal. Then she frowned. "I'm sorry," she said, "but first class is for ticketed passengers only. Companions, medical aides, or dependents must board separately." Valerie blinked. "She is ticketed. Check seat 1B. "I see it," Coates replied. "But based on her age and appearance, she may require documentation for boarding in first class. We've had cases of mistaken upgrades." Valerie stared at her. "You think I tried to sneak my mother into first class?" "I'm saying we have protocols," Coates said, clicking her keyboard. "And your companion appears to need additional verification." Valerie's jaw tightened. "She's not my companion. She's my mother." Coates didn't flinch. "Regardless, she doesn't match the profile of typical first-class travelers." There it was. Not even coded. Just said. Valerie heard it, felt it. So did Opal. Her mother didn't react. She didn't raise an eyebrow. She just gently touched her daughter's wrist. It was a silent signal, one Valerie had known since childhood. Let them think what they want. You don't have to prove yourself to people who've already decided you don't belong. But Valerie wasn't 8 anymore, and she was tired. She straightened her spine. "You're looking at 2 fully paid first-class passengers," she said. "You have our boarding passes, our names, our IDs. So, what exactly are you trying to verify?" "I'm following procedure, ma'am," Coates replied, coolly. "You may wait in the secondary boarding area while we escalate to a supervisor." Valerie didn't move. "Why can't we wait in the first-class lounge?" "You don't qualify," Coates said, without blinking. "Not until the reservation is fully verified." Valerie opened her mouth, then closed it again. From the corner of her eye, she saw 2 men, white, mid-50s, carrying golf bags, breeze past security and head straight toward the lounge without a glance from anyone. She looked back at Coates. "This isn't going to end the way you think it will." Coates offered a thin smile. "Ma'am, threats won't help." Valerie didn't threaten. She just stared. Because some part of her already knew this wasn't just about a boarding pass. It never was. And while the gate agent typed something into the system, probably flagging her as difficult, Valerie stood there in silence, calculating. Not how to fight, but how to end it. Valerie sat beside her mother in the hard plastic chairs near Gate 43's secondary seating zone, also known as the place they stuck people who didn't belong anywhere else. The overhead intercom crackled with cheerful boarding updates for other flights, other lives. She could feel the stares. Passengers shuffled past, some whispering, others looking straight through them. But what made Valerie's skin crawl wasn't the looks. It was the silence sitting between her and her mother. Opal Knight hadn't said a word since they'd been asked to step aside. Not a sigh, not a single, "This is ridiculous." She just sat there, legs crossed, hands folded over her handbag, looking ahead like she was waiting for a piano recital to begin. And that silence? It cut Valerie deeper than any insult the gate agent could have hurled. She should have said something. She should have stood her ground. But instead, she froze. She let it happen. Let them treat her mother like a second-class citizen, like she didn't belong. Because the moment she raised her voice, she knew what it would look like. Another difficult black woman at the airport. So she swallowed it. Swallowed every inch of that anger, and sat down like a good little problem. She glanced over at her mother again. Opal's expression hadn't changed, but Valerie saw the quiet disappointment tucked beneath it. Not in her daughter. Not exactly. In the world. In how little had changed, even after all this time. Valerie spoke first, voice low. "You okay?" Opal turned to her slowly. "I'm not hurt, if that's what you mean." Valerie nodded, unsure of what to say next. There was no fixing this. Not in real time. I thought things were better now," Valerie murmured. "Better?" Opal gave a soft, bitter chuckle. "Baby, no one changes until it costs them something." A few feet away, the gate agent, Coates, whispered to another attendant. The second woman glanced over, then quickly looked away. Valerie caught the exchange. She wasn't paranoid. She'd spent too long in boardrooms to miss subtext. Then it happened. Another passenger walked up, a white woman in pearls and a lavender blazer, dragging a Louis Vuitton roller bag. She looked tired but composed. She held out her phone with the boarding pass displayed. No ID check, no questioning tone. Just a smile from Coates and a cheerful, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Halverson. First class is down the left aisle." Valerie felt heat rush up her spine. Same airline, same ticket, different treatment. Her mother noticed too. "I saw that," Opal said quietly. No judgment in her tone, just observation. Valerie felt the lump rising in her throat. "I should have said something back there," she whispered. "No," Opal said, turning to her, eyes sharper now. "You did what was right. You stayed calm. You didn't give her what she was fishing for. But it felt like I just let them win. You think this was the first time someone underestimated me? Talked down to me?" Opal gave her a small smile. "You don't owe people a performance. You owe them accountability, and that comes later, when you're ready, not when they expect it." Valerie nodded, though the weight in her chest remained. Nearby, Coates looked up and called out, "Ms. Knight, supervisor's on the way. Please continue to wait here." Valerie didn't respond. She just crossed her legs and stared out the window, watching a plane taxi toward the runway. The problem wasn't the delay. It wasn't the seating or the check-in hassle. It was this. Her mother, Opal Knight, the woman who'd raised her to believe she could sit anywhere, belong anywhere, had just been treated like baggage, like someone who needed a chaperone, like an inconvenience. And Valerie had stood there, powerless. The image kept looping in her head, her mother stepping aside without protest. That quiet grace, that knowing restraint. It used to inspire her. Now it broke her. "You ever wonder," Valerie said suddenly, "if it's all worth it?" Opal tilted her head. "What is? All this effort, the money, the titles, the Ivy League degree, the company, just to walk up to a gate and still be treated like we're trying to scam our way into comfort." Opal paused. Then she leaned in, voice soft but firm. "No, I don't wonder. Because every door they make you fight to open stays open for someone after you." Valerie blinked. Her mother never sugarcoated things, but she also never stopped believing in purpose. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. Not the anger, that stayed, but the shame, that began to burn away, slowly. Valerie wasn't wrong to feel humiliated. But she was wrong to think silence was her only option. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. It started as a whisper, but it hit like a slap. Ugh! You can always tell when someone's trying too hard to look first class. Valerie didn't even have to turn her head. She knew that voice. Sharp, clipped, coated in condescension. It belonged to the same woman who had looked her straight in the eye and asked if her mother was a companion. Sharon Coates. The gate agent hadn't meant for her to hear it. She was speaking to a fellow employee, someone younger, new, trying not to react. But Coates hadn't bothered to lower her voice much, because in her mind, Valerie wasn't someone she had to respect. She was just another problem in the way of a smooth boarding process. Valerie sat frozen, jaw clenched, fingers pressed into the armrest of the plastic airport chair. Across from her, her mother remained perfectly composed, but Valerie could feel it, her pulse just beneath the surface. "She said that on purpose," Valerie murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Opal didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, she said, "Let her." That was how she'd always survived, by letting the world reveal itself, by watching, collecting, remembering, and when the time was right, acting in a way that couldn't be ignored. But Valerie had had enough. This wasn't just another airport delay. This was disrespect, disregard, and public humiliation dressed up as policy. She stood up, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to be seen. Coates looked up mid-sentence and startled slightly. For a second, her mask slipped, and something flickered across her face. Maybe guilt, maybe just annoyance. "Everything okay, Miss Knight?" she asked, overly sweet now. The performative customer service voice. Valerie smiled, but it wasn't warm. "I heard what you said." Coates straightened. "Excuse me? You said, you can always tell when someone's trying too hard to look first class." Coates glanced at her coworker, suddenly very interested in her clipboard. "I think you're mishearing." "I'm not mishearing anything," Valerie said. "And I'm not mistaking the look you gave me when I handed over my boarding pass, or the tone you used when you questioned whether my mother belonged in that seat." Coates folded her arms. "Ma'am, I was following protocol. If you're unhappy, you can speak to the supervisor." "I will, believe me." Valerie's voice didn't rise. She didn't need to shout. Her calm was sharper than any outburst. But the moment was already shifting. Nearby passengers began watching, not just glancing, watching. Phones in hands. AirPods slipped out. One woman actually stopped scrolling and took off her sunglasses. Because this wasn't just about a ticket anymore. It was about the moment someone said too much. A line was crossed. And now everyone could see it. Valerie stepped closer. "You see, Miss Coates, I've flown more miles than I can count. I've spoken at investment forums across 5 continents. I sit on the boards of companies you probably buy products from every day. But the thing I'm proudest of?" She turned slightly, gesturing to her mother, who now looked up, expression still unreadable. "Is that the woman sitting over there raised me with dignity, with restraint, with grace. And she's been walking into rooms she wasn't welcome in since before you were trained to scan a QR code." Valerie held Coates's gaze. "But let's get something clear. If I ever hear you speak about another passenger like that again, especially someone like my mother, you won't just be explaining yourself to a supervisor." She leaned in, voice now a whisper. "You'll be explaining yourself to shareholders." Coates said nothing. Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked twice and turned away, pretending to look at her computer screen. Valerie exhaled. Not out of relief, but out of containment. She turned and walked back to her seat. Opal didn't say anything, just offered a tiny nod. The kind that said, that was enough. But Valerie wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to her general counsel. "Flag this flight. I want everything recorded. Gate agent's name is Sharon Coates. Pull her employee file if we can, and check if Sierra Aero has PR clauses tied to shareholder policy." Then she opened her notes app and typed a few lines. Gate 43, Chicago Midway, May 17th. Public incident. Witnesses present. Language used. Trying too hard to look first class. Flagged for legal. She looked back toward the gate. Passengers were still watching. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of awareness. Something had shifted in the air. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, even when you paid for the same seat as everyone else? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your story. You are not alone. The boarding area had grown quiet again, but the shift was permanent. Passengers had seen something, heard something they wouldn't forget. Valerie could feel it in the air. Eyes still darted toward her, pretending not to. Coates hadn't said another word since being called out. She retreated to her screen, clicking furiously, pretending the moment hadn't happened. But it had. And now everyone was waiting to see what Valerie would do next. She didn't rush. She sat, calm, composed. Then she pulled out her phone and opened her encrypted comms app. 2. Legal Ops. Night. Equity Group. Subject, Sierra Aero Flight 287. Urgent. Begin compliance sweep on Sierra Aero. I want all internal DEI records, investor relations filings, and shareholder breakdowns within 6 hours. Cross-reference with existing airline holdings. Full audit. Quiet, discreet, but move. She pressed send. It was just one message, but it meant a dozen people across 4 cities were now moving, researching, compiling, quietly mapping the pressure points of the very airline that had just humiliated her mother. It wasn't revenge. It was control. She looked at Opal, who was still seated calmly, her cane resting beside her, ankles crossed, unreadable. Valerie knew that look. That wasn't serenity. That was containment. Her mother hadn't forgotten anything. Neither had she. And as if on cue, the gate phone rang. Coates answered. Valerie couldn't hear the words, but she saw the way the woman stiffened. Her eyes darted toward Valerie, then back to the phone, then toward the door to the jetway. A moment later, a man appeared. Clean-cut, navy blazer, silver pin on his lapel. Supervisor. He walked over quickly, introduced himself. Ms. Knight, I'm Gary Reardon. I understand there's been a concern? Valerie raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling it? Gary smiled nervously. I've reviewed the boarding records. I want to personally apologize for the delay. Your seats are confirmed, and we'll be boarding in just a few minutes. She stared at him for a beat. We've had confirmed tickets for 2 days. Yes, ma'am. There was a misunderstanding at the gate. Valerie tilted her head. Would that misunderstanding have happened if my mother were white and wearing a pearl necklace? Reardon's smile faded. We're committed to serving every passenger with... Don't finish that sentence, Valerie said softly. Just take us to the plane. Yes, ma'am. He gestured toward the gate. The door opened. First-class boarding was underway. Valerie stood. So did her mother. She didn't speak another word to Coates as they passed. Neither did Opal. But they didn't have to. That silence said it all. As they entered the jetway, Valerie noticed 2 young men in business suits. 20-something, sharp haircuts, clearly junior finance guys, whispering to each other. One of them glanced over and nudged the other. That's her. That's Valerie Knight. She didn't turn around. But Opal heard. As they reached the aircraft door, the flight attendant at the entrance lit up. Welcome aboard, Ms. Knight. We've been expecting you. Valerie gave a tight smile. I bet you have. They were led to seats 1A and 1B. Window and aisle. Champagne was already waiting, chilled. Valerie helped her mother settle in, adjusted the seatbelt for her, then sat down. She hadn't even fastened hers when the lead flight attendant appeared again. I wanted to personally apologize for the boarding experience, she said. Valerie looked up. You weren't there? No, ma'am, but I read the incident log, and I just want you to know, we're not all like that. Valerie nodded once, then leaned closer. Then don't just say that. Prove it. Make sure the next woman who looks like my mother doesn't get asked if she's supposed to be there. The flight attendant swallowed, nodded, and walked away. As the plane taxied, Valerie leaned her head back, closed her eyes for the first time in hours. And then, softly, her mother spoke. "You handled that with restraint." Valerie opened her eyes. "Barely. I'm proud of you." Valerie turned toward her. "For not screaming at her?" Opal chuckled. "No, for not needing to. You didn't have to raise your voice. You raised your standards." Valerie swallowed hard. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a shared moment with her mother. But it had become something else, something familiar and infuriating. Still, they were in the air now, out of reach, but not out of options. Valerie reached for her phone again and opened the news app. She typed in Sierra Aero Holdings. She wasn't looking for gossip. She was looking for leverage. For most of the flight, Valerie stared out the window, but her mind was racing elsewhere. Numbers, names, structures. She wasn't just thinking about what had happened at Gate 43. She was thinking about how easily it could have gone unnoticed, how many times it already had, for people without a name, a company, or the means to push back. She turned to glance at her mother. Opal Knight was reading the in-flight magazine, legs crossed, as if nothing had happened. But Valerie knew better. "Mom," she said quietly, "you sure you're okay?" Opal didn't look up. "You keep asking that like you don't already know the answer." Valerie exhaled, then smiled. "Because I do." There was a pause. Then Opal closed the magazine, folded it neatly, and rested it on her lap. "When I was 34, she began, "I went to Atlanta for a teacher's conference. I had saved for months to fly instead of take the train." Valerie turned fully to face her. Her mother almost never spoke about the past unless asked. "I wore my best dress, sat in coach, window seat. The flight attendant smiled at everyone but me, called me dear, like I was a problem to be managed." Opal's voice was soft but steady. "At the end of the flight, I stood to get my bag, and she said, 'Ma'am, coach passengers exit after first class. Please sit down.'" "But you were in coach," Valerie said, frowning. "I was," Opal nodded. "Just happened to be ahead of her first-class friends in the exit aisle." Valerie clenched her jaw. "What did you say?" "Nothing," Opal said, with a slight shrug. "I stepped aside, let them go first, got off the plane, and made sure I never forgot how it felt." She turned to Valerie now. "That feeling? That's why I invested in airlines for the past 40 years, why I read every annual report, why I built silent equity positions while men in suits thought I was just someone's secretary." Valerie stared at her. "You did all that? For that one moment?" "I did all that," Opal said, "so that one day I'd have the power to decide who boards first." There it was. Her mother's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And now, all those years of watching, waiting, investing in the background, it was time to move. Valerie leaned back in her seat, her mind already snapping into focus. She had grown up thinking her mother taught middle school for 3 decades because she loved it, and she did. But what she hadn't seen was that teaching had never been the only plan. There had always been a second track: building quiet power, accumulating equity, investing where few people thought to look, like mid-level regional airlines, flight technology firms, and jet fuel suppliers. Her mother didn't just belong in first class. She could own the plane. As the captain announced their descent into JFK, Valerie opened her phone again and pinged her investment strategist. "Flag Sierra Aero board. Check for quiet stock movements over past 30 days. Get me the top 10 private holders. I want ownership clarity by EOD." She looked at her mother again. "Mom, how much stock do you still hold in Sierra Aero?" Opal smiled softly. "Enough to make someone return my calls." Valerie blinked. "Enough to move a vote?" Opal simply raised an eyebrow. "You think I taught you to sit on the sidelines?" The wheels touched down in New York with a bounce. By the time they reached the terminal, Valerie already had 3 responses from her team. The audit was underway, and her mother's holdings, spread across 4 trusts and 2 shell entities, were no longer just quiet. They were activated. They stepped off the plane in New York to the usual chaos of JFK. businessmen pacing, families dragging tired toddlers, airport staff yelling gate changes into the void. Valerie moved with calm precision, her mother beside her like a shadow of quiet steel. The difference now was that Valerie saw her differently. Her mother wasn't just composed, she was loaded with leverage. Opal hadn't said much since they landed. She didn't need to. Valerie could tell from the slight narrowing of her eyes that she was calculating. Every footstep wasn't just a walk through an airport. It was a march towards something. In the car, Valerie broke the silence. "I know I'm your daughter, but I gotta ask, how long have you been planning this?" Opal looked out the window, her voice even. "Planning what?" Valerie smirked. "Owning enough shares to trigger a phone call that could shake a boardroom?" "I didn't plan this incident," Opal said, "but I've always planned for a moment." Valerie's phone buzzed. Her analyst had sent the file. She opened it, scanning quickly. Holdings summary. Opal Knight Trust, Q2. 9.6% of Sierra Aero voting stock. Additional 4.4% held via secondary shell structures. Total exposure 14%. Quiet majority achieved via proxy partnerships. Valerie blinked. "Mom, you own 14% of the airline." Opal didn't even look surprised. "It was 12 until last quarter." "You're the largest individual stakeholder." "No," Opal said, now turning toward her. "I'm the silent one. That's more powerful." Valerie couldn't help but laugh. Low and sharp. "You've been waiting for a reason to go loud, haven't you?" "I've been waiting for the right reason," Opal corrected. They rode in silence for another minute. Valerie's team was already preparing options. Legal pressure, PR strategy, shareholder leverage. But Opal wasn't reaching for lawyers. She was reaching for her reputation. When they arrived at the hotel, Valerie excused herself to jump on a Zoom call with her legal counsel. Opal stayed behind. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened her leather-bound Rolodex, yes, she still kept one, and flipped through familiar names. CEOs, former regulators, fund managers who still owed her favors from 30 years back. She made one call, not an assistant, not a gatekeeper. She dialed direct. "Hello? This is Opal Knight." There was a pause. Then the voice changed tone instantly. "Mrs. Knight, it's a surprise to hear from you." "I'm sure it is. I need to speak with the board chair of Sierra Aero Holdings." Well, I'd have to schedule." "No," Opal interrupted, her tone firm but not raised. "Tell them Opal Knight is calling." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "One moment." Exactly 5 minutes later, the chairman of the board, a man named Douglas Shaw, age 67, who'd once invited Opal to keynote an industry dinner and then never returned her follow-up email, was on the line. "Mrs. Knight, what a privilege. You don't need to butter me up, Doug." Of course. How can I help you?" "There was an incident yesterday involving a Sierra Aero gate agent at Midway, Flight 287. A sharp inhale on the other end. "I'm aware. It's made some internal rounds. The passenger in question." "Was me," Opal said flatly. There was no response. "I was the passenger your employee humiliated, and my daughter, Valerie Knight, was the woman she tried to remove from first class." "Mrs. Knight, I'm so sorry. This is beyond unacceptable." "I agree." More silence. She let it sit. Then she said it. "I want the CEO and senior board members on a video call. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. EST. "I understand. May I ask the purpose?" "The purpose," Opal said calmly, "is to give your leadership team an opportunity. An opportunity to keep your jobs." Upstairs, Valerie wrapped up her call and returned to find her mother flipping her phone shut. "You just ended something," Valerie said. Opal smiled faintly. "No, I just began something." Across town, at Sierra Aero headquarters, the chairman's office erupted into movement. Calls went out to the CEO, to legal, to PR. Because when Opal Knight called, people didn't ignore it. They researched, they whispered, they remembered stories. How she'd once outbid 2 hedge funds for a controlling stake in a Canadian freight carrier just to protect a union pension fund. How she'd tanked a board vote at United Transair because a CFO tried to dilute shares without shareholder consent. She wasn't just a shareholder. She was a legend in tailored wool coats and soft pearls. Back in the hotel room, Valerie looked over at her mother. "You're not going to sleep, are you?" Opal shrugged. "Power naps count." Valerie paused. Then, "Mom, why now? Why this fight?" Opal's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I spent my life accumulating influence no one saw coming. I waited for the moment when I wouldn't have to shout to be heard. And now?" "Now," Opal said. "They'll hear me from the tarmac. 10 o'clock a.m. sharp." The screen blinked once, then settled into the familiar grid of suits and strained smiles. Opal Knight didn't bother with pleasantries. "Good morning," she said, eyes locked on the camera. "Let's not waste time." Across the screen sat 7 faces, senior executives of Sierra Aero Holdings. Chairman Douglas Shaw, CEO Liam Carr, and a mix of legal, PR, and investor relations officers. Some wore ties too tight. Others had tried to dress casual, as if downplaying the gravity, but no one was relaxed. Because they knew who was speaking, and more importantly, they knew who she wasn't. Opal Knight wasn't an activist. She wasn't a social media figurehead. She didn't go viral. She went quiet. Then she went strategic. And by the time you realized she was moving, it was already too late. Valerie sat just off camera, watching from her own laptop. She wasn't speaking, not yet. Today wasn't her show. Her mother was at the helm. Opal leaned forward slightly. "You all know why I'm here." Chairman Shaw cleared his throat. "Yes, Mrs. Knight. First, let me say on behalf of Sierra Aero, we deeply regret the incident at Midway. It does not reflect our values." "Stop!" Opal didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You've had 3 racial discrimination complaints in the last year alone," she said. 2 involved gate agents. 1 involved a pilot. None resulted in visible disciplinary action. So don't tell me this was an isolated event. The CEO, Liam Carr, jumped in. "Mrs. Knight, we're actively working on strengthening our DEI programs, and..." "You're not," she interrupted. "You've outsourced bias training to a third-party vendor with no measurable KPIs. Your HR documentation reads like a lawyer wrote it to avoid liability, not enforce it. And your board has exactly 0 black members. Am I missing anything?" Silence. "I've held my position in your company for 11 years, she continued. "At first, quietly, then actively. I stayed silent because I believed there was progress in motion. I was wrong." "Mrs. Knight," Shaw tried again, "what is it you're asking us to do?" Opal folded her hands. "I'm not asking. I'm informing." The shift in tone wasn't subtle. It was seismic. "I hold 14% of your company's voting stock, and I've secured proxy leverage on another 7%. That gives me a 21% block. Effective immediately, I am calling for the following measures." She held up 1 finger. 1. A full independent investigation into the Midway incident, not conducted by in-house legal. I want names, statements, flight logs, and gate transcripts. Another finger. 2. Public accountability. I want a written apology, not to me, but to every black passenger who's ever been questioned for not looking first class. Publish it. Own it. A third. 3. Effective this quarter, I am nominating my daughter, Valerie Knight, as Special Equity Advisor on matters of civil rights, corporate conduct, and investor impact. She'll have monthly access to board strategy sessions. Valerie's eyes widened slightly. That part hadn't been discussed. But her mother didn't glance at her. She was in full motion now. "And 4, Opal added, we're restructuring your training model. Horizon Tech Solutions has a platform already piloted by 2 international carriers. We'll be adapting it for Sierra Aero." CEO Carr looked stunned. You want us to let Horizon lead our employee bias training? I want you to stop checking boxes and start changing culture, Opal replied. And you will license the system at cost. Shaw blinked. That's quite the list, Mrs. Knight. That's the minimum, she said coolly. Unless you'd rather I bring it to a vote. Carr leaned forward. You mean a formal shareholder motion? No, Opal said. I mean the media. I'm quite sure Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal would love to print the headline. Major airline faces proxy rebellion after elderly black passenger is humiliated at gate. Her gaze never wavered. I'd hate for your stock to dip another 14%. The line went dead silent. Valerie couldn't help but glance at the bottom corner of her screen, where one junior executive, barely 30, had gone pale. His camera was off a second later. Opal sat still. Shaw adjusted his tie. We'll need time to review. You have 40 hours to issue your board's formal acceptance, Opal said. Otherwise, I go public. And if I go public, I go loud. Believe me, gentlemen, you won't win that war. A long pause. Then Shaw nodded slowly. Understood. Opal clicked something on her phone. You'll find the full list of requests and legal draft in your inbox. Time-stamped, pre-reviewed. I suggest you read it. Then, with the quiet grace of someone who had just torn down a wall without raising her voice, Opal ended the call. Just like that. The screen went black. Valerie sat frozen. Then she laughed, short, breathless. You just threatened an entire board and got away with it. Opal gave her a look. I didn't threaten. I negotiated. Valerie stood, pacing. Do you realize what you just did? You didn't just fix a gate incident. You're reshaping their whole policy model. You're restructuring corporate behavior. I'm not interested in fixing moments, Opal said, sipping tea from the hotel bar. I'm interested in fixing systems. Valerie looked at her mother, really looked, and saw not a former teacher or a quiet investor. She saw a force. You're unbelievable, she said. No, Opal replied. I'm tired of waiting for people to grow a conscience. She stood and straightened her coat. I raised you to play chess, but sometimes it's not about the board, it's about owning the room the board is in. At exactly 9:00 a.m. the next morning, Sierra Aero's official channels went live. Twitter, LinkedIn, their homepage, a full-page ad in the New York Times, a video statement across cable news. It was everywhere. We failed. That was the headline. The message, signed by the CEO and board chair, included a direct acknowledgement of the Midway incident. It named the gate agent. It named Opal Knight. It named what happened. Not a misunderstanding, not an unfortunate experience, but discrimination, plain and public. And for once, they didn't hide behind passive voice or legalese. We acknowledge that Ms. Knight and her daughter were treated in a manner inconsistent with the dignity and respect all passengers deserve. We recognize the role unconscious bias played in this incident, and we are committed to long-term, systemic change. They pledged a third-party investigation, listed the incoming board oversight policies, and publicly announced their partnership with Horizon Tech Solutions to overhaul employee education and equity training. The same company Valerie had built from scratch. The same woman they had tried to humiliate at a boarding gate. It was, on paper, a perfect apology, but the internet had seen too many perfect apologies before. Within an hour, hashtags began trending. #flying. While black, #first class. But still black, where Opal Knight did that screenshots of the statement flooded social media. But so did comments like, nice words, but what are they really changing? We've seen this show before. New logo, new slogan, same bias. If Ms. Knight hadn't been a billionaire, would this even be news? Others got more personal. One post had over 60,000 likes by noon. It read, My mom was kicked off a plane for talking too loud in Spanish. Where was her apology? Valerie sat in the corner office of her Manhattan tower, watching the response unfold on 3 monitors. Her comms team was tracking engagement, sentiment, and press coverage. But none of that held her attention. Her eyes were fixed on the comments section. That was where truth lived. That's where she saw it. The ache, the anger, the tiredness. From people who knew this wasn't just about her or her mother. It was about all the times no one had a camera, or a last name that meant something, or shares that could shake a boardroom. It was about all the black passengers who had paid full fare but still been treated like trespassers. Valerie leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. This couldn't be the end. The apology wasn't justice. It was just the start. And from the look on her mother's face during breakfast that morning, Opal knew it too. Earlier that day at Josephine's brownstone in Harlem, Opal stirred sugar into her tea without looking up. "They're calling it bold," she said, calling the apology a landmark moment in corporate responsibility. Valerie raised an eyebrow. "They also called United's apology bold when they dragged that doctor off the plane." Opal chuckled. "True. Feels like we knocked on the door of the system," Valerie said, "and they threw us a PR bone hoping we'd walk away." "I don't walk away," Opal said, "especially not when we're just getting started." Valerie sipped her coffee, thinking, what if we didn't stop at Sierra Aero? Opal paused. "Go on. What if we use this spotlight, not to settle, but to set a new standard?" Opal slowly nodded, watching her daughter closely. "I built Horizon to deliver tech," Valerie said. "But now, we could build something bigger, a coalition, real tools, standards airlines have to adopt to keep federal contracts, a scorecard the public can actually read, flight crew accountability databases." "You mean," Opal said slowly, "a passenger bill of equity?" Valerie grinned. "Exactly. Not just for wealthy flyers, not just for those with shareholders on speed dial, but for everyone who steps onto a plane and expects to be treated like a person." It was the kind of movement that couldn't be ignored. By evening, Valerie had already received emails from 4 different airline equity officers. 2 asked to consult with Horizon. 1 offered a preliminary licensing deal. The 4th wanted to be on the right side of this moment. But the message that hit her hardest came from someone she'd never met. It was a simple email from a woman in Chicago. No company signature. Just this. Subject: Your mother. "Ms. Knight, I just wanted to say thank you. I've worked as cabin crew for over 20 years. I've seen things I'll never forget. I've said nothing because I needed the job. But yesterday, I saw your mother's name trending. And when I read what she said to the board, I cried in my kitchen. I just wanted you to know she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for me too." D. Flight attendant. Chicago Midway. Valerie read it 3 times. Then she forwarded it to her mother. Opal responded 2 minutes later with only 5 words. "Then we're not done yet. What would real accountability from a company look like to you? Not just words, but action. Drop your thoughts in the comments." Opal's watching, so are we. The ballroom shimmered with controlled luxury. Marble floors, gold-accented chandeliers, the kind of sterile opulence designed to impress without saying a word. It was the Global Equity Leaders Forum, held annually at the Peninsula in Midtown Manhattan. An invite-only event where finance giants rubbed elbows with policy wonks and mid-tier venture capitalists desperately tried to look important. Valerie wasn't on the official speaker list. She hadn't been for 3 years, by her own choice. She no longer needed the stage. These days, she owned the floor. Still, she moved through the reception like a panther in pearls, calm, sleek, unbothered. Every few steps, someone recognized her and tried to engage. "Valerie Knight, can I just say what your team did with that agri-tech merger in Q1 was genius. Loved your mother's statement, quiet power. That's leadership. You consulting on that Delta lawsuit? You have to be, right?" She nodded politely, said little, and kept walking. Tonight wasn't about press or praise. It was about positioning. Because in the back of the room, standing with a bourbon glass and a smirk, was Martin Kessler, Senior Vice President of Operations at Sierra Aero. A man who hadn't appeared on the public apology, who hadn't said a word online, who had, according to her inside sources, privately lobbied to keep Heather Coates from being terminated. He was here, loud, laughing, untouchable, or so he thought. Valerie circled the perimeter once. Then she walked to the bar, ordered club soda with lime, took a slow sip, then turned. Kessler spotted her, blinked, then grinned. Well, well, if it isn't the woman who taught every Fortune 500 CEO how to sweat in a boardroom. Valerie raised an eyebrow. And if it isn't the man who thinks he's invisible because his name wasn't in the statement. He chuckled. Touché. She didn't laugh. Martin swirled his drink. Look what happened in Chicago. Messy stuff. But let's not pretend it's the first time someone pulled the race card to get a press cycle moving. Valerie's spine stiffened. Race card, she repeated. He shrugged. Come on, you know how this works. Bad optics, social media storm, company panics, press release, donation, diversity training, and then it's back to business. She stared at him for a long moment, then tilted her head slightly. You don't know who you're talking to, do you? Kessler's smirk wavered. Excuse me? You think I'm the headline, Valerie said, her voice calm but cold. The woman with the big LinkedIn post, the angry daughter, the CEO looking for leverage. Kessler raised his eyebrows, uncertain. Valerie took a step closer. I'm not the storm, she said. I'm the temperature change that tells you winter's coming. People had started to turn now, just slightly, enough to notice the tension, to catch a phrase, to sense a shift in the air. You don't know who I am, Valerie continued. Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing here holding a drink. You'd be checking your employment contract. Kessler scoffed. I've been with Sierra Aero for 19 years. And in 72 hours, she said, you'll be listed in a shareholder transparency report under Executive Personnel Risk Liability. He laughed. It was nervous now. You think you can get me fired? I don't need to, she said. I'm just making sure when it happens, you won't be surprised. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a thin manila folder, and handed it to him. This is your signature on an internal email, she said, as he opened it. Calling the Midway incident a harmless overreaction to an elderly flyer with an attitude. He paled. You CC'd 5 people. 2 of them now report to me. Kessler's mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out. Across the room, someone pulled out a phone. She didn't care. Let it trend. 20 minutes later, Valerie slipped out the back entrance. The marble hallway was quieter, dimmer, but not empty. Opal was waiting. How'd it go? Her mother asked without looking up from her phone. He won't finish the quarter, Valerie said, tucking the clutch under her arm. Opal nodded. And the folder? He has it, with time-stamped headers. Opal smiled slightly. Good. They walked in silence for a while. Then Opal spoke again. You didn't have to do that yourself. Yes, Valerie said. I did. She took a breath. Because it's not just about him. It's about every smug man in a suit who thought a first-class ticket was an exclusive club for people who look like him. Opal glanced sideways. And what about you? Valerie didn't answer right away. Then, I don't want a seat at their table anymore. Good, Opal said. Because we're building our own. The next morning, the clip was viral. Blurry video, bad angle, but the audio was clear. You don't know who you're talking to, do you? I'm not the storm. I'm the temperature change that tells you winter's coming. At night effect was trending on Twitter by noon. By dinner time, Martin Kessler was on administrative leave. By the end of the week, 3 more Sierra Aero execs had stepped down. And Valerie? She wasn't celebrating. She was structuring. With Opal and her legal team, she drafted a framework for a national passenger equity certification, a public-facing badge for airlines who met strict anti-discrimination and accountability thresholds. Think TSA pre-check, but for human decency. And the kicker? They weren't asking for adoption. They were tying it to investor pressure. If you didn't have the badge, BlackRock, Vanguard, and Knight Equity Group would recommend divestment. Valerie smiled to herself as the final slide rendered. She thought of Gate 43, of the silence her mother held, of the boardroom that shook, of Kessler's face when he realized the world had changed. And she knew, without doubt, this wasn't the end. It was the blueprint. It started with an email, bland, unassuming, and flagged as internal only, do not forward. But Valerie had seen enough internal memos in her career to know what that meant. Someone inside Sierra Aero was finally ready to talk. Her private inbox had been quiet for days, but now a new message blinked on screen. The subject line read, Gate 43, you need to see this. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence and an attached zip folder. They've been hiding more than just us. Valerie stared at the screen for a beat. Then she downloaded the file. Inside were dozens of PDFs, all time-stamped over the last 4 years. Most were incident logs, complaints, flagged behavior reports, diversity committee notes, and internal communications between compliance officers and department heads. Each file told the same story, just with different names, airports, gate agents, and outcomes. A black family removed from a flight because the mother spoke aggressively to staff after asking for water. A Latina businesswoman accused of trying to use someone else's boarding pass until she produced her passport. A Sikh man with a turban marked customer of interest for boarding too early. A teenage boy with autism removed after a flight attendant mistook a meltdown for refusal to obey. Every report ended the same way. No further action taken. Handled internally. Staff member reminded of protocol. Valerie's heart pounded in her chest. She had come to believe the Midway incident was part of a pattern. Now she had proof. She called Opal. Her mother picked up on the second ring. You have something. I have everything, Valerie said. And I'm done playing defense. That afternoon, Valerie met with Horizon's internal legal counsel and her senior compliance director in their Manhattan tower. She laid out the documents on the conference table, one by one. No one spoke for a full 5 minutes. Then the compliance director, a sharp-eyed woman named Janine, leaned forward. This isn't just bias, she said. This is systemic misconduct with a paper trail. They've had formal complaints logged, documented, and dismissed. Deliberately? Valerie asked. Janine nodded. Or negligently enough that it doesn't matter. Her general counsel, Ray Nguyen, frowned. If we go public with this, they'll scream breach of confidentiality. We didn't sign any NDAs, Valerie said. These were leaked, not stolen. And our name is already in the public fire. If we stay quiet, we become complicit. Ray was silent for a moment. Then, you're right. Valerie looked out the window. Across the skyline, planes crisscrossed the sky, small silver specks moving in and out of LaGuardia and JFK. Thousands of people, dozens of flights, each one a potential replay of Gate 43. This can't just be a viral apology anymore, she said. This is a reckoning. 2 days later, The Atlantic published the story. It was titled, The Flights You Never Heard About. Inside Sierra Aero's Hidden Record of Passenger Discrimination. The article began with Valerie's voice, clear, deliberate, firm. She didn't mince words. This isn't about one gate agent. This is about a system that quietly assumed people like my mother didn't belong in first class. That punished confidence when it came in the wrong accent, the wrong hairstyle, or the wrong skin tone. Screenshots of the internal files followed, redacted names, case numbers, dates, a spreadsheet with over 200 logged incidents, no lawsuits filed, no terminations, no public acknowledgement. By mid-morning, the article had been reblogged by the New York Times, Vox, Fast Company, and Forbes. MSNBC ran a panel on the cost of corporate silence, and Valerie was invited to testify at a House subcommittee hearing on transportation equity. But what hit hardest wasn't the media. It was the emails. Thousands of them. From employees, from passengers, from people in other airlines who'd experienced the same things but had no way to speak up until now. One message came from a black woman who'd been a gate agent herself for 15 years. "I was told to use my discretion when boarding passengers. But when I questioned an entitled white man in a rumpled suit who tried to cut in, I was reprimanded for being too confrontational. Your mother's silence at that gate? That was the most powerful thing I've seen in years." Valerie sat in her office and read until midnight. Opal joined her around 10 o'clock p.m., carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "You've started something," her mother said. Valerie nodded. "Now I have to finish it." She turned the screen toward Opal. One email caught her eye. It was from a civil rights attorney in Georgia. "I'm assembling a class action, and I'd like your help." At Sierra Aero headquarters, the fallout was immediate. The audit that had been quietly commissioned after Valerie's board call was now a front-page scandal. The CEO, Liam Carr, issued a second statement, this time on national television. "We failed in more ways than we understood. These documents are a wake-up call, not just for Sierra Aero, but for the entire airline industry." But it wasn't enough. The airline's general counsel resigned, the head of HR stepped down, and the board voted unanimously to create a permanent equity oversight committee with Valerie as external advisor. She declined the offer. Instead, she proposed something else. "A public dashboard," she told them. "Every incident, every resolution, transparent, no spin." The chairman blinked. "You want us to self-report?" "No," Valerie said. "I want you to grow up." And she left the meeting. In Harlem, Josephine Knight watched it all from her sunroom. Opal sat beside her, crocheting in silence. "She reminds me of you," Josephine said, eyes on the screen. "No," Opal replied. "She's better. She doesn't wait for doors to open. She builds the walls they'll hang on." Josephine smiled. "I guess the system didn't expect a woman raised by teachers and sharpened by boardrooms." Opal nodded. "They didn't expect me either." They clinked mugs of tea in quiet celebration, not of vengeance, but of something far rarer, consequence. That night, Valerie sat alone on the balcony of her apartment overlooking the city. The air was crisp. Planes blinked quietly overhead. She thought about the flight she'd never forget, the sound of her mother being questioned, the feel of that gate agent's stare, but most of all, the silence. The silence Opal had held with so much gravity, it could have bent steel. She had grown up learning that silence was weakness, that you had to fight loud. Now she knew better. Sometimes, the most dangerous voice in the room was the one that waited, that listened, that struck only once, but with everything behind it. And as Valerie watched the news ticker flash across the building opposite her balcony, she knew they hadn't seen the last of her. Because this wasn't about a seat on a plane anymore. It was about who gets to board the future. The marble floors of the Capitol felt cold under her heels. Valerie had walked into countless boardrooms. She'd negotiated $500 million acquisitions, debated heads of state, even testified in front of the SEC. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't speaking for shareholders. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The hearing was titled, "Racial Bias and Passenger Rights in Commercial Aviation." A mouthful, designed by bureaucrats. But Valerie knew what it really meant. It meant Gate 43 had finally landed in Washington. She wore charcoal gray, unbranded. Her hair was pulled back. Her voice, when she greeted the aides, was level and calm. Inside the chamber, the buzz dropped when she entered. She saw the committee panel already seated, 8 members, senators from New Jersey, Georgia, California, Texas, staffers on either side with notepads, blinking laptops. A few camera crews lined the back wall. They were ready. So was she. "Miss Knight," the committee chair said, clearing her throat. "Thank you for joining us today." Valerie adjusted the mic. "Thank you, Senator Morales." The senator nodded. "Your written testimony has been received and entered into the record. You may proceed with your opening remarks." Valerie didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. She leaned in slightly, just enough for the mic to catch her full voice. "Good morning. My name is Valerie Knight. I'm the founder and CEO of Horizon Tech Solutions, a firm specializing in enterprise systems and corporate accountability analytics." She let that sit a beat, then continued. 3 weeks ago, my mother, Opal Knight, a retired educator and major shareholder in Sierra Aero Airlines, was humiliated at Gate 43 in Midway Airport. She was questioned, doubted, and delayed from boarding a flight she had every right to board, solely because she did not fit the image some staff held of a first-class passenger. A pause. You could hear a pen cap snap. But this hearing is not about one gate or one airline. It is about a pattern that spans decades, across airports, across companies. A pattern of biased assumptions and unaccountable conduct. She scanned the room. No fear, no apology. Let me be clear. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about access, about dignity, about the basic right to move through public spaces, airports no less, without being policed, profiled, or punished for how you look. The Georgia senator, a middle-aged black man with a civil rights background, nodded solemnly. Through a leaked internal audit, Horizon uncovered over 200 documented incidents of passenger mistreatment at Sierra Aero alone. Most involved black or brown passengers. Not one resulted in termination. Not one resulted in systemic reform. She let that hang for a moment. And if it happened at Sierra Aero, it's happening elsewhere. The Texas senator, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a lawyer's cadence, leaned in. "Ms. Knight, thank you for your clarity. You've been vocal about the idea of moving beyond performative apologies. Could you elaborate?" Valerie folded her hands. "Certainly. After the Midway incident, Sierra Aero issued a statement of regret. They said they'd implement training. That's become the default corporate response. PR, training, and waiting for the outrage to pass." She paused. "But I believe in metrics, not moods. That's why Horizon is launching the Passenger Equity Index." A staffer looked up. The senator arched an eyebrow. "The what?" "It's a transparency tool," Valerie explained. "It rates airlines based on reported incidents, resolution outcomes, diversity of leadership, and internal accountability systems. Every U.S. carrier will be ranked quarterly based on independently verified data." She reached into her folder, pulled a packet, and handed it to the clerk. "Inside are mock-up dashboards, sample reports. We've already signed preliminary agreements with 2 carriers. The index is designed to inform passengers, guide investors, and give regulators real-time visibility." "And what," the senator asked, "do you want from this body?" Valerie didn't flinch. "I want the Department of Transportation to formally endorse the Passenger Equity Index. I want all federal airline subsidies to be contingent on measurable anti-bias compliance. I want transparency to have teeth." The California senator, an older woman with decades of consumer rights advocacy behind her, tapped her pen. "Ms. Knight," she said, "you spoke about your mother in your opening remarks. Would she be willing to share a statement for the record?" Valerie smiled gently. "She's here, Senator." Heads turned. From the back of the chamber, Opal Knight stood, composed as ever, in a deep blue shawl, her silver hair wrapped in a neat bun. She didn't speak. She just nodded once. And that, somehow, said more than words. After the hearing, Valerie stepped into the hallway, where reporters and advocates had begun to gather. Flashes burst. Questions flew. "Ms. Knight, how did it feel to confront the system that tried to humiliate your mother? Will Horizon sue other airlines next? Is the index a prelude to regulation?" She paused at the mic. "All we ever wanted was a seat on the plane," she said. "Not extra perks, not special treatment, just the same dignity given to others without question. She looked into the sea of faces, some curious, some angry, some hopeful. My mother taught for 34 years. She taught students how to read, how to write, and how to believe they belonged anywhere. Today, I sat in front of people who make the laws of this country and reminded them of the same thing. Then she walked off. No slogans, no victory lap, just grace and strategy. That night, Opal and Valerie returned to Josephine's brownstone. The air was cool, the sky thick with stars. They sat on the porch with warm cornbread and mint tea. Josephine, flipping through a binder of newspaper clippings, muttered, "When I was your age, I had to sit in the back of the bus. Now my granddaughter rewrites the damn seating chart." Valerie chuckled. Opal raised her cup. To never asking permission again. They clinked quietly. Back at Horizon headquarters, Janine forwarded a new report. Delta, United, even Southwest, each requesting access to the Passenger Equity Index pilot data. They weren't just watching now, they were moving. And behind them, a growing coalition of consumers, labor unions, legal scholars, and grassroots organizers. Because this wasn't about just airlines anymore, it was about any system where power meets the public and decides who's welcome. And for the first time, that system was answering to someone it never expected. A black woman from Oakland, with receipts. And a mother who never raised her voice, but raised hell when it mattered. The room was smaller than Valerie expected. Not small in square footage, small in feel. It used to be a 6th grade classroom, cracked chalkboards, tall windows, radiators that hissed in winter. Now, it was the headquarters of the Knight Center for Corporate Dignity. And today, it was where Valerie signed the papers that made her no longer the CEO of Horizon. Her name was coming off the website. Her photo was being replaced. The last string tying her to the world of tech deals and IPOs was being cut. She laid the pen down carefully. Opal stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of mint tea. "You look like a woman who just walked off a cliff," she said. Valerie smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like a fall." "What does it feel like?" "A relay," she said. "Like I've been carrying something heavy, and now it's time to pass it on." 3 weeks earlier, they'd made the announcement. Horizon was being handed to new leadership, and the Knights were shifting their focus to education. Not lectures, not corporate seminars, but something bigger. The Knight Center would be the first institution dedicated entirely to training future leaders in what Opal called the ethics of dignity. Every case study they'd lived, every system they'd challenged, every quiet lesson hard-won behind closed doors, they were putting it on the table for the next generation to learn from. They weren't just stepping away from power, they were redistributing it. At the launch event in Oakland, Valerie stood in front of the old auditorium podium. No microphone needed. The audience was small. Students, community organizers, retired judges, mid-level managers from airlines and hospitals. No one wore suits. That was the point. She looked around the room. "I've built companies, consulted with governments, testified in Washington, but this might be the most important room I've ever stood in." She paused. "My mother used to say, legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you set in motion. And this," she gestured around the room, "this is motion." In the front row, a 19-year-old girl from Detroit wiped her eyes. Valerie saw it, noticed it, kept going. "We're not here to make headlines. We're here to build people who change what headlines are possible." Back in New York, headlines kept coming anyway. Sierra Aero's board issued its first full transparency report, citing Knight Index compliance. Jetstream Airlines voluntarily requested a Knight audit. And the Department of Transportation released a statement. All federally contracted carriers must begin public equity disclosures by 2026. It was slow, bureaucratic, messy, but it was real. And it had begun with Gate 43. Opal's days grew quieter. She taught a weekly class called Presence as Power. It filled every time. She never used slides. She started every session with the same prompt. Tell me about a time you didn't raise your voice, but got heard anyway. People cried, people wrote, people changed. Josephine, now 84, ran the Night Center Library. She handpicked every title. One shelf was labeled Flight, not because they were about airplanes, but because every book on it was about escape, ascension, or freedom. She kept a photo of her daughter and granddaughter taped to the inside of the reference desk drawer. Underneath, she wrote, "We come from women who do not wait for permission." 6 months after stepping down, Valerie received a call from a major broadcast network. They offered her a primetime docuseries. She declined. Instead, she used the time to mentor a group of 14 students. One of them, a quiet boy from Raleigh, said his dad used to work night shifts, cleaning airport terminals. "He told me," the boy said, "that sometimes being invisible is a survival skill." Valerie looked him in the eye. "Then you're about to learn how to turn survival into strategy." On the 1-year anniversary of Gate 43, Opal and Valerie returned to Midway, not to grandstand, just to walk. They checked in with no bags, walked through TSA like anyone else, and stood quietly near Gate 43 for a moment. No press, no microphones, no crowds, just a daughter and a mother, occupying space, because now they belonged wherever they stood. That night, back in Oakland, Valerie sat alone on the porch of the schoolhouse that now bore their name. She looked out at the city lights and thought, "This isn't what I dreamed. It's better, because this center, these people, these hard conversations that don't make the news but change lives, this is what justice looks like in its final form. Not applause, but infrastructure. Not revenge, but revision." And as wind rustled through the oak trees and laughter drifted from the kitchen where Opal was teaching her mentees how to make sweet tea the right way, Valerie knew they hadn't just won, they'd redefined the game. Have you ever taught someone what respect looks like without raising your voice? Maybe it was your child, your student, a coworker who assumed too much, a stranger who said too little. If this story reminded you of someone you fought for, or someone who fought for you, share it in the comments. Even a quiet memory can change someone's day. And sometimes the smallest legacy is the one that travels the farthest. We're listening, and so is Opal.